'Twas mercy that brought me from my pagan land.
One, two, three, four.
Peace, peace, Black people. How's everyone doing this afternoon, this Tuesday afternoon? Welcome to Yemima's World, the Jelly Moose's Cafe. I am Yemima, your host, and it is good to be Black in the land of the living once again. Let's get into it. All right, so the title of this is Palatable Black History. Let's find out what that means. Um, this weekend, past weekend, I had a chance to go to a conference. And the conference was about the evolution of religion in this country. And so there were a panel, and then they had breakout sessions. And all religions, well, I won't say all, but of course, the three Abrahamic religions were being showcased. The panel consisted of two white women, two white men, and no, three white men, and one black man. So we had a Jewish woman, a Christian woman, I lie, two white women, a Jewish white woman, a Christian white woman, a Muslim woman, and two white men and one black man. So they had the breakout sessions, and of course, I wanted to attend the ones that the black people were given, but only had one up there. So I'm like, I'm going to be all day just in one class. So I chose one, and it ended up being a black professor who wasn't on the panel but was doing one of the breakout sessions. And his session was on African American religion in the United States. I think either up into the Revolutionary War or right at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. I can't remember. But he talked about the different types of religion or the different ways that African Americans were uh, practicing their religion during that time period. Now, he did speak on a little bit on African spirituality. He talked about the Congo cosmogram that we find sometimes in the churches in the South. And he talked about a little bit about the Orishas. I believe he brought up Ogun, and he brought up, I think it just might have been Ogun. Very little. And so at the end of the class, I asked him why he thought maybe other African spirituality religions that were practiced in this country are not talked about, such as hoodoo and voodoo. And so he says that a lot of people don't want to hear about that. They seem to turn a deaf ear to it. And so after that class, a white gentleman came up to me, and he thanked me for asking the question. He said back in the late 90s, he was contemplating writing a paper about hoodoo in the Virginia Hampton Roads area. And some of his African American female friends told him that it wouldn't be a good idea and kind of pushed back against it. And he was like, I think they did it because they didn't want anyone to remember what they considered a backwards way of thinking and the superstitions that their ancestors kind of adhered to. And I said, well, that could be the reason. I said, but it also could be because you're an old white man and you probably shouldn't be writing about things that you don't know about, and writing about things that you went to the internet to find information about. So that could be it too. And he laughed and he was like, you're right. That could be it. He said, so they probably just wanted to spare my feelings, but thank you for not sparing my feelings. And I said, anytime. So then I went to another Black Guys session, and he was talking about he's written a book, and the book that he has written is about a black bishop and I can't remember his name. I know his last name was Marren, Marren, but I can't remember the first name. But he talked about how, he became a bishop in the Christian faith, and how he traveled the globe. He got to go to Europe, and he got to go to Liberia and proselytize to those poor, horrible Africans and things of that nature. And so, people loved him. So this is where we come to the palatable Black history. And what I am learning, and what I do as a historical interpreter, as a historian, as someone who just observed things, I realize that a lot of Black people, Black historians, Black interpreters will do Black history interpretations in blackface, meaning they will interpret the stories using white words, through a white lens, through the eyes of the white gaze, but will do it in blackface, in their natural state of being an African American. And a lot of times they will only choose those historical figures that are palatable to mainstream white people. And so I asked him that very question. I said, why don't, professors, when they're teaching Black history, why aren't the revolutionaries talked about? Why don't they talk about Nat Turner? Why don't they talk about Denmark Vesey and Gullah Jack, or a Gabriel, or the Haitian Revolution, how they used voodoo to set it off? And he really didn't have an answer. He just kept referring. He said, well, in my book, I talk about Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey. And I said, okay, but why is it that it seems as though we kind of shy away from, those that are deemed, um, that will leave a horrible taste in the mouths of white people? White people love Martin Luther King Jr., but they detest Malcolm X. They love Harriet Tubman based on what has been told about her. If people were to really, really talk about the Africanism and the African spirituality of Harriet Tubman, she would also leave a bad taste in their mouth. But she's safe, she's palatable, because the first thing white people said, oh, she was such a good Christian. And there was an old white man that seemed to be in every freaking class I was in, and he always had something racist to say at the end of each class. And so, I said, people think that Harriet Tubman was such a great Christian. And he said, she was a good Christian. I said, looked at him and I said, was she really a good Christian? Because her and, the thing about it is, Harriet Tubman was illiterate. She couldn't read English. Nat Turner could. He could read the Bible from cover to cover. But you don't think of him as a good Christian. And they both wanted the same thing. They both wanted freedom. You just believe that Harriet Tubman went about it in a nonviolent way. Did she? So when we read like about Harriet Tubman, again, her story is told through the eyes of a white woman. Harriet Tubman dictated her story to, I believe her name is Sarah Broadford. And so Sarah wrote this book. And in writing this book in the late 19th century, she told people, this book has to be palatable to white people, because those are the ones that's going to be reading it. Most of us still were not able to read English. And so, if they had put in the book about Harriet Tubman, about her Africanism, about her African grandmother, about the fact that her mother taught her how to be a root worker and how her father taught her how to use nature to escape, that would not have been palatable to white people, and the book would not have sold as much as it did. Now, the problem I have with that is The book was written. Sarah Broadford claimed that she wrote it to help Queen Mother Harriet Tubman out. But Queen Mother Harriet Tubman died penniless. Did y'all know that? She didn't have anything. She worked for the Army, for the Union Army, and at the end of the war, she didn't get anything for her service for the war. Nothing. Not until her husband died and she got his pension, his military pension, but before then, she got nothing. But if they had put the African spirituality, the book wouldn't have sold so well. And I wonder what Miss Sarah did with all that money that she made off of the back and life of Queen Mother Harriet Tubman. Frederick Douglass is another one that's palatable, especially since he married a white woman after his first wife, Anna Murray Douglass, passed away. He married a white woman. So he definitely became palatable. I don't know of any historians, and again, I don't know them all, but I don't know of any historians, black historians, that tell the stories of the revolutionaries. I'm one of the only ones that I know because I tell the story of Gabriel through the eyes of his wife Nan. I tell the story of Nat Turner through the eyes of his wife Cherry. And so I go there, but I don't know too many that do. Palatable. In the second brothers session, he talked about Phyllis Wheatley and how he admired her so much. And I'm like, why? What's the admiration for? And I'm not saying that I don't admire her, but what is the admiration? She was the first African. She wasn't an African American. She was an African because she was born in Africa. She was the first African woman to have a book published in the United States, and it was a book of poems. Phyllis Wheatley was brought to the Americas, to Boston, on the ship called the Phyllis. She was bought by the Wheatley family, and they named her Phyllis after the ship that brought her. They took no time letting her know that, you know, it was by the grace of God and the good folks like the Wheatley that brought her here, and now she can leave her pagan land of Africa, that dark, dark place. And so if you listen to the beginning of this podcast, she says, it was grace that brought me from my pagan land. So writing that, and that's one of her poems that she writes about. And even though she had to prove that she wrote these poems because they didn't think an African had that type of intelligence to do anything, and she had to sit before like a jury and let them know, yeah, I wrote this. I was, the Wheatleys taught me how to read and write, and I have a brain. But she had been brainwashed to believe that being separated from her mother and father and being brought here to be enslaved was a good thing. And because she never deviated from that, she was palatable. She was a palatable Negro. And there are lots of palatable Negroes. Usually, the ones that invent things and create things, uh, they find some way to make them palatable. And the ones, of course, that rebel or revolted or whatever you want to call it, they become those that leave a bad taste in your mouth and they don't really want to hear about it. But we got to get out of telling our history, because if we continue to make it palatable to white people, how are our children going to learn the real history? Because y'all not teaching it in the homes. So they're getting it out, if they go to events. And at the events that they go to, it's always the palatable Negro. I mean, I've not heard anyone other than me, when they tell stories about our ancestors, um, use the language that our ancestors would have used. I did learn last night at an event, and I'll tell you about that in a second, that Zora Neale Hurston was criticized for the way she wrote because she used the language of the ancestors or whoever it is she was interviewing. When she interviewed Cujo for the Clotilda, she used his African words, and she was criticized for for using it. So when I'm doing a interpretation, I use the language that my ancestors would have used had they had the freedom to use it. So I'm speaking from a free person's perspective, not someone who was enslaved. Because if I spoke in from an enslaved mindset, my interpretations would be, oh, Missy was so kind to us. Oh, Lord, she fed us every day. I don't even know why I wanted to run away because she was so, so, so good to us. As opposed to me saying, oh, them bakra, yeah, them beats my children, them beats me, and I couldn't wait to get away from them. And every time I cook food for them, I wanted to spit in it. That's the kind of stories I tell because that's truth. That's real Black history. That other stuff is bullcrap. So we got to get out of telling this palatable history, and we have to tell it in truth and in wholeness and unapologetically. I'm not going to tell you the Nat Turner story and tell you that it grieved him to kill somebody. No, it did not grieve him. It did not. And it shouldn't have. And people don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear it. So last night I went to an event. A friend of mine was giving a talk. She just returned from Ghana, and well, before I get into that, let me tell you this quick story about Saturday. So at the event at the conference, so I met this Black lady, and we were sitting together at the beginning, and so we kind of introduced ourselves, and so we kind of hung out all day, and when we were eating lunch with a few other people, and we were just talking about what our practice was when it came to religion because it was a conference about religion, and we were just talking about what our different practices were. And I was telling them that I was a practitioner of hoodoo and heavily into ancestor veneration and making sure that I honor my ancestors. And she was sitting next to me, and she kind of leaned over and almost in a whisper, she said, "Do you really think your ancestors hear you when you talk to them?" And so I didn't whisper. I stood 10 toes down, my chest was puffed out, and I looked at her and I said, "Do you really think your Jesus hear you when you talk to him?" And she returned to her sandwich. She didn't want to talk anymore. But we still kind of hung out the rest of the day. I didn't have any ill wills against her. You talk to whoever you want to talk to because he's an ancestor. So, you know. So last night I went to an event, and a friend of mine just returned from Ghana, and she gave a wonderful presentation um, about the ancestors and remembering the ancestors and just how it's so much of the same in the motherland as it is for African Americans or for American born Africans here. Some of the same things that they do there, we do here. She said there were murals of Malcolm X. Um, she went to the museum, to the mausoleum, which houses the remains of W.E.B. Du Bois. And so it was really, really great. And so, of course, at the end, she had Q&A, and it never fails. It's going to always be a buckra that's going to have something stupid to say. Now, this particular buckra was only half buckra. Her daddy was an African or African American. She was only half buckra. And she said to the facilitator, she said, "Don't you think that we should send people back to Africa, African Americans to Africa, to help them so they can see how far we've come. Um, and her family were morticians, and so she touched on the fact that her family has been in business since the um, late 18th century, no, 19th century, and that in Africa they don't embalm. Now I don't know how true it is, but that's what she said. So her way of thinking was, we've come such a long way here. We embalm our dead. So don't you think we should go back to Africa and let them know that we've come so far and help those poor people? And so I couldn't let her get away with it. And so I'm sitting there and I'm squirming and I'm waiting. And so afterwards I raised my hand with a question or a statement, and I was like, Africa don't need our help. Africa is rich with resources. Without Africa, we this world wouldn't work, because it houses 90% of the resources that we use to make things work. And we go into Africa as missionaries and colonizers, and I don't think that we need to show them how far we've come, because they are pretty much further along in some cases than we are. And they're not a poor continent. There's poverty everywhere. And so, no, I don't think that we need to go to Africa. And the facilitator said, for real, we probably need, colonizers need to just stay out of Africa. And so the white woman was very taken aback with my stance. And I'm looking at her like, how dare you think that Africa needs half of your help? So that was that. So again, palatable Black history. We've got to stop talking about those that on the surface look like they were happy to be enslaved, or waited till the Lord said to set them free, or whatever it is. We've got to change that narrative and tell our history in truth and in wholeness, unapologetically, and unwhitewashed. All right, so that's it. So until next time, stay safe, love yourself, love each other, give yourself some grace, give each other grace, stay healthy, stay Black. Till next time, peace.